Hello students, welcome to E-Pathasala. Today I am going to present the measurement scales, an important aspect in research methodology. Measurement of variables is an integral part of research and an important aspect of research design. The characteristics of individual and business vary from individual to individual and from entity to entity. In case of human beings, there are certain physical and quantitative characteristics like height, weight, and there are certain abstract or qualitative characteristics like intelligence, integrity, attitude, creativity, etc. In the case of business organizations also, there are physical characteristics like employees, sales, profit, etc., which are easily measurable. However, there are certain abstract characteristics like reputation, image of the entity, motivation, customer perception. The perceptions and feeling of customers and employees are extremely important because they help the company to stay afloat and grow. Measurement means assigning numbers or symbols to the characteristics of certain objects. We do not measure the object but some characteristics of it. Therefore, in research, people or consumers are not measured. What is measured only are their perceptions, attitude, and any other relevant characteristics. There are two reasons for which numbers are usually assigned. First of all, numbers permit statistical analysis of the resulting data, and secondly, they facilitate the communication of measurement results. The assignment of numbers to the characteristics must be isomorphic. Scaling is an extension of measurement. It involves creating a continuum on which measurement of objects are located. Suppose you want to measure the satisfaction level towards coffee day and the scale of 1 to 11 is used for the said purpose. The scale indicates the degree of satisfaction with 1 denoting extremely dissatisfied and 11 denoting extremely satisfied. Measurement is the actual assignment of a number from 1 to 11 to each respondent. Scaling describes the procedures of assigning numbers to various degrees of opinion, attitude, and other concepts. This can be done in two ways, namely making a judgment about some characteristics of an individual and then placing him directly on a scale that has been defined in terms of that characteristics. Secondly, constructing questionnaires in such a way that the score of individual's responses assigns him a place on a scale. Characteristics or goodness of instruments or measurement scales. A measurement scale has to have certain desirable characteristics or criteria to judge its goodness so that one could have faith or a trust in the scale that it will measure what it is intended to measure. The following are the main characteristics of measurement scales. They are accuracy and precision, reliability, validity, and practicality. Accuracy and precision. The characteristics of accuracy in measurement scale means it should be a true representative of the observation of the underlying characteristic. The precision, however, means the power to discriminate or distinguish and indicate the extent of accuracy that can be achieved with the measurement scale. For example, examination is conducted to measure the knowledge and understanding of the student. The marks scored out of say 100 would provide better accuracy and precision than simply grading the students as A plus, A, B plus, B and C. Reliability. Reliability indicates the confidence one could have in the measurement obtained with a scale. It tests how consistently a measuring instrument measures a given characteristic or attitude is measured again and again, leading to about the same conclusion. It may be emphasized that reliability does not necessarily imply that the measuring instrument is also accurate. All it means is consistency in drawing conclusion. Validity. The validity of a measuring instrument indicates the extent to which an instrument scale tests or measures what it is intended to measure. For example, if we intend to measure intelligence, the instrument, say the question paper, ought to be such that it results in measuring true intelligence. If the paper tests only general knowledge, the instrument is not valid. Types of validity. There are three types of validity: content validity, criterion validity, and construct validity. Content validity, it indicates the extent to which the measuring instrument provides adequate coverage of the issues that are under study. Criterion validity, there are two types. One indicates the success of measuring instrument used for predicting. The other, also called concurrent validity, is used to estimate the present status. Construct validity, it is one of the most significant aspects in the development of measurement theory and practice. It links psychometric notions and practices to theoretical notions. It attempts to explain the variations observed on several individuals. For example, if a test of intelligence is conducted on individuals and the test scores obtained by measurement scale vary from individual to individual, one like to know the factors to construct behind this phenomenon. Practicability, from theoretical viewpoint, a measure is ought to be reliable and valid. However, from practical viewpoint, the measure should be economical, convenient, and interpretable. The economic consideration leads to a comparison between ideal research project and availability of budget for a study. Thus, the measuring instrument has to take cognizance of this aspect and designed accordingly. The convenience implies the case with which an instrument like questionnaire could be easily administered to the subjects, participants, or respondents. In this, one could give due attention to the proper layout of the measuring instrument. This poses more challenge in situations whereas the concepts and constructs are rather difficult to understand. Interpretability of an instrument like questionnaire is the case with which the researcher is able to interpret the responses from the subjects, respondents, or participants. Properties of scales. Properties of scales include distinctive classification, order, equal distance, and fixed origin. Distinctive classification, a measure that can be used to classify objects or their characteristics into distinctive classes or categories, is said to have this property. This is a minimum requirement for any measure. For example, gender classifies the individuals into two distinctive groups, male and female. Order, a measure is said to have an order if the objects or their characteristics can be arranged in a meaningful order. For example, marks of the students can be arranged in an ascending or descending order. Equal distance, the difference between any two consecutive categories of a measured attribute are equal, then the measure is said to have equal distance. For example, the time difference between 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. is same as the difference between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. Next is fixed origin. A measurement of a measuring characteristic is said to have a fixed origin if there is a meaningful zero or absence of characteristic. For example, income of an individual, sales of a company. Classification or types of measurement scales. The most widely used classification of measurement scales are nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale, and ratio scale. Nominal scale, the qualitative scale without order, is called nominal scale. The nominal scale involves classification of measure objects into various categories such as yes or no, pass or fail. Numeric value is assigned to these classified categories like house number, telephone number, or roll number of the student. The data collected through nominal measure scale is called nominal data. Ordinal scale, a qualitative scale with order, is called an ordinal scale. It tells whether an object has more or less characteristics than some other objects. It is a scale that does not measure values of characteristics but indicates only the order or rank like first, second, third, etc. Some examples are rating of hotels, restaurants, and movies. The data obtained using ordinal scale is termed as ordinal data. Interval scale, a measurement scale whose successive values represent equal value or amount of characteristic that is being measured and whose base value is not fixed, is called an interval scale. It provides more powerful measurement than ordinal scales. It also incorporates the concept of equality of interval. This is a quantitative scale of measure without a fixed or a true zero. It is a quantitative data that can be measured on a numerical scale. However, the 0 point does not mean the absence of characteristics being measured. Some examples are temperature, time, longitude, latitude, etc. The data obtained from an interval scale is termed as interval data. Ratio scale. This is the highest level of measurement and has all the four properties of a scale. Ratio scale represents the actual amount of variables. Ratio scales are quantitative measures with fixed or a true zero. The data obtained from ratio scales are referred to as ratio data. Ratio is also a quantitative data that can be measured on a numerical scale, but here the 0 point is fixed and implies the absence of what is being measured. In fact, if the scale has all the features of an interval scale and there is true 0 point, then it is called ratio scale. Table 1 gives the examples of measurement scales. Statistical analysis based on scales. Depending on the property of the scales, there is a limitation on the descriptive statistics one can perform on the scales. Table 2 summarizes the descriptive statistics that can be used on the type of scales. Scaling techniques. There are several scale formats that have been developed to enable a researcher in collecting appropriate data for conducting a study. The scales are broadly divided into two categories, namely conventional scaling and unconventional scaling. The conventional scales are used in the questionnaire format and are most common. The unconventional scales are used for unconventional collection of data through games, puzzles, etc. Conventional scales are of two types: comparative scaling techniques and non-comparative techniques. Comparative scaling techniques. The comparative scale involves direct comparison of the different objects. Comparative scale data are measured on ordinal scale and interpreted in relative terms, and such as they generate non-metric and non-numerical data. Type of comparative scaling techniques. There are three types: paired comparison, rank order, and constant sum. Scales, the respondent is asked to select one object from the list of two objects on the basis of some criteria. This forces the respondents to compulsorily select one of the two. Such scales are used when the study requires to distinguish between two specified objects. For example, in the study of consumer preferences about two brands of glucose biscuits, namely Parle-G and Tiger, select one of the two brands. Which glucose biscuit do you prefer on the basis of taste, on the basis of price? This scaling technique is useful when the researcher wants to compare two or more objects. In the above example, we have compared two brands over two factors, hence the number of comparison is 2. Rank order scaling. In the rank order scaling, respondents are represented with several objects simultaneously and asked to order or rank them according to some criterion. It is also termed as forced ranking scale. Unlike paired comparison, rank order scaling technique prompts the respondents to rank a given list of objects. For example, rank the following services in the order of importance attached by you while selecting a new mobile service provider. The most preferred can be ranked 1, the next as 2, and so on. The least preferred will have the last rank, and we should not repeat the ranks. Constant sum rating scale. When it is to assess the relative importance attached by a respondent to the objects in a list, the constant sum scaling technique is used. In this technique, a respondent is asked to allocate certain points out of a fixed sum of points for each object according to the importance attached by him or her to that object. The object is not so important, the respondent can allocate 0 point, and if an object is the most important, he or she may allocate the maximum points out of the fixed points. Generally, the total fixed points are 100 for simplicity, but it may take some other value depending on the study. For example, you have to allocate the amount you would like to spend on your birthday on the following items out of the total amount of 10,000. Please note, total amount allocated should be exactly equal to 10,000. The following table reveals. Next is non-comparative scales. In the non-comparative scales, the respondents do not make use of any frame of reference before answering the questions. The resulting data is generally assumed to be interval or ratio scale. For example, the respondent may be asked to evaluate the quality of food in a restaurant on a 5-point scale, 1 indicating very poor, 2 poor, and 5 very good. Types of non-comparative scales: graphic rating scale, itemized rating scale. Under itemized rating scale, Likert scaling, semantic differential scale, and staple scale. Graphic rating scale, this is a continuous scale, also called graphic rating scale. In the graphic rating scale, the respondent is asked to tick his preference on a graph. Please put a tick mark on the following line to indicate your preference for fast food. You have to indicate from 1 to 7. To measure the preference of an individual towards the fast food, one has to measure the distance from the extreme left to the position where the tick mark has been put. Higher the distance, higher would be the individual's preference for fast food. The basic assumption in this scale is the respondents can distinguish in fine shading differences between the preference or attitude, which need not be the case. Further, the coding, editing, and tabulation of data generated through such a procedure is very tedious task, and the researchers would try to avoid using it. Another version of graphic scale could be the following. For example, please put a tick mark on the following line to indicate your preference for fast food where the values are mentioned. This is slightly better version than the one discussed earlier. For example, if a respondent had earlier ticked between 5 and 6, it is likely that he would remember the same, and the second time he would tick very close to where he did earlier. This means the difference in the two responses could be negligible. Next is itemized rating scale. In the itemized rating scale, the respondents are provided with a scale that has a number of brief descriptions associated with each of the response categories. It is widely used in survey research. There are certain issues that should be kept in mind while designing the itemized rating scale. The issues are the number of categories to be used. There is no hard and fast rule as to how many categories should be used in an itemized rating scale. However, it is a practice to use 5 or 6 categories. It is a fact that additional categories need not increase the precision with the attitude of being measured. Odd or even number of categories. By using even number of categories, the scale would not have a neutral category, and the respondent will be forced to choose either the positive or negative side of the attitude. If odd numbers of categories are used, the respondent has the freedom to be neutral if he wants to be so. Balanced versus unbalanced scales. A balanced scale is the one which has equal number of favorable and unfavorable categories. The example of balanced scale: how important is the price to you in buying a new car? So there are 5: very important, relatively important, neither important or unimportant, relatively unimportant, and very unimportant. The examples of unbalanced scale are: how important is the price to you in buying a new car? Most important than any other factor, extremely important, important, somewhat important, unimportant. Next is nature and degree of verbal description. Verbal descriptions must be clearly and precisely worded so that the respondents are able to differentiate between them. Next is forced versus non-forced scales. In a forced scale, the respondent is allowed to take a stand, whereas in the non-forced scale, the respondent can be neutral if he or she so desires. Paired comparison scale, rank order scale, constant sum rating scale are examples of forced scales. Physical form. There are many options that are available for the presentation of the scales. It could be presented vertically or horizontally. The categories could be expressed in boxes, discrete lines, or units on a continuum. They may or may not have numbers assigned to them. The numerical values, if used, may be positive, negative, or both. For example, suppose we want to measure the perception about Jet Airways using a multi-item scale. So it could be very bad to very good. The commonly used itemized rating scales are Likert scale. The Likert scale is the most frequently used variations of the summated rating scales, commonly used in the studies relating to attitudes and perceptions. Summated rating scales comprise statements that express either favorable or an unfavorable attitude towards the object of interest on a 5-point or 7-point or any other numerical value. The respondents are given certain number of items or statements on which they are asked to express their degree of agreement or disagreement. Likert scale is also called summated scale because the scores of individual items can be added together to produce the total score for the respondent. The following example gives the Likert scale statements and the measures. Likert scale has several advantages that make it more popular. It is relatively easy and quick to compute. Further, it is more reliable and provides more data for a given amount of respondents' time as compared to other scales. The data gathered through this scale is interval data. Next is semantic differential scale. This scale is widely used to compare the images of competing brands, companies or services. In semantic differential scale, a respondent is required to rate each attitude object on a number of 5 or 7-point rating scales. The difference between Likert and semantic differential scale is that in Likert scale, the number of statements are presented to the respondents to express their degree of statement or agreement or disagreement. However, in semantic differential scale, bipolar adjectives or phrases are used. The advantages of semantic differential scale is that it is versatile and gives multi-dimensional advantage. It is widely used to compare images of brands, products, services and companies. The data generated from this scale can be considered as numeric in some cases and can be summed up to arrive the total scores. Staple scale. Staple scale is used to measure the direction and intensity of an attitude. The scale generally has 10 categories involving numbers -5 to +5 without a neutral point and is usually presented in a vertical form. Suppose a restaurant is to be evaluated on quality of food and quality of service, then the staple scales would be presented as given below. The data generated in staple scale is interval data. It can be used to collect data through telephonic interview. This method is most applicable where evaluative responses are to be rated on a single dimension. The scale is most economical where several items are all to be rated on the same dimension. Students, you have listened the different types of measurement scales and scaling techniques which are presented in a lucid manner and a simple language. I hope the module on scaling techniques will help you to frame your questionnaire suitably to get the required primary data. The different types of measurement scales, namely nominal, ordinal, interval and ratio scales could be understood properly while before framing a questionnaire. The different scaling techniques that we have looked into, especially the comparative scaling techniques, are very much useful while framing a questionnaire. And for the qualitative data, the Likert scaling technique is more appropriate as it will help you to collect the data from each of the respondent and you can attain the total score earned by total scores given by each of the respondent for different aspects of their perception or attitude. This module will be very much useful while framing a questionnaire, especially in collecting primary data in the field of marketing, customer satisfaction or in the human research area.